Eric, did you want to speak?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, in the
Yeah, man,
course
go
of
ahead.
your in the course of your debates, I'm sure you've encountered a lot of Catholic arguments for why the Roman Catholic Church is the true church. Probably some high tier, some low tier. I want to ask a two-part question. One is, can you present what you think? Can you steelman what you think is the strongest argument that the Catholics can present for why the Roman Catholic Church is the true church? And then can you maybe respond with your counter argument to that from an Orthodox perspective?
I mean, I really think that if you read the Edward Szyszynski book on the papacy and Orthodox, the first several chapters kind of deal with probably the strongest papal proof texts. So I don't really think there's one single argument that's like the strongest papal argument. I think the strongest thing that they have going for them would be some of the quotes from like some of the legates or um, I think it's the chapter where he deals with the Bishop of Rome from the third to eighth century, and I forget the name of the chapter, but it's like chapter 2 or 3 in the Szyszynski book, and I think he deals pretty well with each of those quotes. That really those quotes only quote prove the papacy if you assume the papacy, because a lot of times Roman Catholics will say, "Well, look, here's this very strong statement from Pope Celestine," or "Here's this really strong statement from Pope Agatha," right? And it's like, yeah, but if you're Orthodox, you don't really have a problem with that. That's not a problem for your system because that would just be the Bishop of Rome claiming more and more powers, which he may or may not have, right? So, because it hasn't been established yet that he has those powers. So the fact that the Bishop of Rome progressively claims more and more things from the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh centuries up, they think is a proof for the papacy. And there are a couple places where there's some pretty strong claims. But the problem is the debate isn't are there strong claims in a couple people in the first 8 centuries? Because even within an Orthodox paradigm, we could say, well, they're just kind of going out of the bounds and deviating, right? The claim is rather, I think, or the issue is rather, is the Vatican I idea present in the papacy? And if you read the Alexandria document, which is the recent follow up to the G80 document at the Vatican website, they pretty much have admitted in both the Chieti and Alexandria documents that no, the papacy really didn't operate in this unilateral way in the first millennium. And so that's pretty much a defeater for Vatican I.
Cheers. Give me some good stuff to look up. I'll do some reading and research.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
everybody should read that. I mean, it might be a little pricey. It's an Oxford text, but it's Edward Szyszynski's recent book, Papacy and the Orthodox, or it's called The Orthodox and the Papacy. Um, and it's the second or third chapter that works all the way through all the contentious quotes, from like the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh century. Those are, I think, are the key areas where we would have to kind of do a little bit of explaining for. I mean, I'm only aware of two quotes that are quote strong papal quotes. They don't prove Vatican I, and when you understand the context, the actions of the church don't treat those quotes as um, Vatican I proofs or as like divine fiat statements. For example, Lateran 649. This is not one of the strong papal quotes, but it's an example for what I'm saying about the church not viewing these things as papal. The Pope intended that council to be ecumenical. It's the first council that was called by a pope. It's Pope Martin. And if you go to Rome, you can find the old Lateran Basilica is still there where they had this council. It's called Lateran 649. And it was the papal condemnation of monothelitism. Now, if the church of that time had a papal view, then there would have been no need for the Sixth Ecumenical Council because the Sixth Ecumenical Council was in 681 and it's meeting to condemn monothelitism. So, why would they have this council if Rome had already condemned it? There's no need for it. And keep in mind that uh, Pope Martin intended it to be the first ecumenical council called by a pope and not an emperor. And the rest of the church just simply didn't see it that way. And so hence they had the Sixth Ecumenical Council. And um, when Pope Agatha wrote his letter affirming the two wills, the two energies doctrine, the church, the council investigates to see if it was consistent with previous teaching and with, Leo and with Cyril. Well, why would you be investigating the Bishop of Rome? It should be the Bishop of Rome investigating you, according to the Vatican I and the Dictatus Papae mindset, right? Dictatus Papae all the way up to Vatican I says no one judges the first see. It is the first see that judges everyone else. So why are they judging Agatha's letter to see if it's consistent with previous teaching? Why do they measure Leo's tome against Saint Cyril at Chalcedon? So the attitude of the church, and by the way, if you remember when Father Richard Price, who's the Roman Catholic translator of all of these acts and sessions more recently, when Reason and Theology had Richard Price on, they asked him this question, and he said, well, because nobody thought the Bishop of Rome was a unilateral universal authority in the first millennium. So Richard Price is expressing the same attitude as what Chiedi admits in the last paragraph of the Chiedi document. It admits that the Roman bishop did not have universal unilateral authority in the first millennium. Okay, well, that's not what Vatican I says. It says the opposite. So is Vatican I right, or is the papacy today that's more flexible and ecumenist right? It can't be. They're mutually exclusive positions. You can't have a position where, well, yeah, they had universal unilateral authority, but also it was something that was developing. And you'll notice that Roman Catholic apologists usually vacillate between these two options. You'll hear them say, "Oh, I mean, the papacy was doing the Vatican I stuff in the first century. Look at Pope Clement." By the way, Soshinsky has a great section on Pope Clement and his letter in that book where he shows that even the Roman Catholic apologists don't use Clement anymore as a proof of Vatican I type papacy. Because again, if it was there and it was clear, as Pope Leo XIII's letter Satis Cognitum says, and as Vatican I says, then it didn't need to develop. Why would it develop if it was there and if it was clear from the earliest days? And yet at the same time, Roman Catholics have to say, well, I mean, it may not have really been there, it just kind of developed, and then you get this, it develops to Vatican I. The seeds of the papacy are there, and then it develops. So you see how they have a totally different, like, move the goalpost flexible account of how something can be there all the time, but it's also a seed form that develops, but it was also always there. And see, here's a quote from the Pope in the fourth century. Well, why is there a quote necessary in the fourth century to prove it if it was there all along? And then at the same time, you're saying it's something that develops. You see how this is a shifting, um, it's an eisegesis position. And I think that's one thing that Ubi shows really well when you get into the nitty gritty of it and you get into the actual quote lines and the context of the quote lines that they use. Like the context almost always defeats the Roman Catholic reading of like unilateral papal authority. But for them, it's like, well, yeah, but here's the seeds of it, and it doesn't really matter. I can read Vatican I back into this. And Ubi has shown for the last 8 years that that's what Ibarra does in a pretty consistent pattern.